when airplanes become almost impossible. Some airplanes are so small, they do not look like aircraft anymore. They look like toys. Some are shorter than a car. Some weigh less than a motorcycle. Some have cockpits so tight the pilot has to squeeze in like they are wearing the aircraft. And a few are so extreme that just watching them take off makes you wonder one thing. How is that even possible? These are not normal airplanes. They are tiny flying machines built by engineers, dreamers, home builders, record breakers, and sometimes people who were just stubborn enough to prove everyone else wrong. Some were built to break world records. Some were built in garages. Some used Volkswagen engines. Some were made from wood, aluminum, foam, and pure obsession. And one of them became the world's smallest jet, a miniature rocket-shaped aircraft so famous it even appeared in a James Bond movie. Today, we are counting down the top 10 smallest and craziest planes ever built. From backyard biplanes and tiny home-built aircraft to miniature jets and aircraft that look almost too small for a human being, these machines prove that aviation does not always need to be massive. Sometimes, the wildest aircraft in the sky are the ones that barely look big enough to fly at all. Let's begin. Number 10, Team Minimax, the tiny wooden plane built for a one-car garage. At number 10 is the Team Minimax. This aircraft proves that flying does not always need a giant hangar, $1 million budget, or advanced carbon fiber technology. Sometimes, all it takes is wood, fabric, glue, patience, and a builder who refuses to believe aviation has to be expensive. The Minimax was created by Wayne Ison in the 1980s with one clear mission: make flying affordable for ordinary people, not airline pilots, not military pilots, not millionaires, just regular aviation lovers who wanted to build a small aircraft with their own hands. The design is simple, lightweight, and compact. It uses wood construction, a plywood box-style fuselage, fabric covering, and a very basic layout that makes it friendly for home builders. The aircraft was designed to be small enough to build in a garage, which is part of its charm. This is not a factory-built luxury airplane. It is a hands-on machine, something a person can slowly create piece by piece, learning the aircraft as they build it. Depending on the model and engine setup, some Minimax variants can fit within ultralight-style rules, while others are built as experimental aircraft. Typical cruising speeds are modest, often around 60 miles per hour or about 97 kilometers per hour, depending on the engine and version. But speed is not the point. The Minimax is about accessibility. It is about proving that the dream of flight does not have to begin at an airport showroom. It can begin in a garage, with simple tools, a stack of plans, and the patience to turn wood and fabric into wings. The Minimax became popular because it gave people a way into aviation that felt possible. Not easy, not instant, but possible. And that is why it belongs on this list. Because some of the smallest aircraft are not just engineering experiments, they are invitations. They tell ordinary people, you do not only have to watch airplanes, you can build one. Number 9. Ison Airbike, the airplane that feels like a flying motorcycle. At number 9 is the Ison Airbike. And the name tells you almost everything. This is one of the strangest and most charming tiny aircraft ever created, because it looks less like a normal airplane and more like a motorcycle that accidentally grew wings. There is no traditional enclosed cockpit, no luxury cabin, no big windshield. Instead, the pilot sits out in the open on a saddle-style seat, almost like riding a bike through the sky. The Airbike was designed by Wayne Ison, the same creative mind behind the Minimax family. But where the Minimax feels like a tiny traditional aircraft, the Airbike feels more radical. It strips the flying experience down to the basics: a frame, a seat, an engine, a wing, and a pilot exposed directly to the airflow. The aircraft uses a welded steel tube structure and folding wings, which makes it much easier to store than many small airplanes. That folding wing feature is important. For home-built aircraft owners, storage can be a real problem. A small aircraft still needs space, but if the wings fold, suddenly the machine becomes much more garage-friendly. The Airbike's wingspan can be around 26 feet, depending on the version. Its empty weight is commonly described around the ultralight range, with some versions around 250 pounds, depending on build and configuration. Typical engines are in the 40 to 50 horsepower range, often Rotax-style power plants. Cruise speed is modest, roughly around 60 miles per hour, or 97 kilometers per hour. But numbers do not fully explain the experience. The airbike is about sensation. Because the pilot is so exposed, even moderate speed can feel dramatic. You are not sitting inside a sealed cockpit. You are sitting in the wind. The world is open around you. The ground is below your feet. And the aircraft feels more like something you ride than something you sit inside. That is what makes the airbike special. It does not try to impress with speed. It impresses with purity. It is one of the closest things to riding a motorcycle through the sky, and for many aviation enthusiasts, that is more exciting than flying fast inside a sealed cabin. Number 8. Mignet HM.14. Flying Flea, the backyard aircraft that started a movement. At number 8 is the Mignet HM.14 Flying Flea. This aircraft is not only small, it is historically important, because in the 1930s, French designer Henri Mignet wanted to create something revolutionary, a simple aircraft that ordinary people could build themselves. The idea was bold. Instead of making aviation more complex, Mignet wanted to make it more democratic. He wanted people to believe that the sky did not belong only to wealthy pilots and aircraft companies. It could belong to home builders too. The Flying Flea had a very unusual design. It used a tandem wing layout, with two wings arranged one behind the other, rather than a conventional wing and tail configuration. It also used simplified controls. The idea was to make the aircraft easier to fly than a traditional airplane. No complex control system, no intimidating cockpit, just a simple machine for the people. That dream made the Flying Flea famous. Thousands of people became interested. Plans were built in workshops, barns, garages, and backyard sheds. The aircraft became a symbol of do-it-yourself aviation. But there was a dark side. Early versions of the Flying Flea had serious stability problems. Some aircraft suffered from a dangerous nose-down condition that could become unrecoverable. The design was later improved, but the early accidents damaged its reputation. That makes the Flying Flea one of the most complicated aircraft on this list. It was brilliant, it was dangerous, it was inspiring, and it was flawed. But it changed aviation culture. Because the Flying Flea proved that a tiny home-built aircraft could create a movement, it made people believe they could build their own flying machine. Even if the first version was not perfect, the idea behind it was powerful. And many later home-built aircraft owe something to that dream. The Flying Flea reminds us that aviation history was not only written by giant companies. Sometimes it was written by people in small workshops, trying to make the sky reachable. Number 7. Hummel Bird, the pocket rocket, powered by half a Volkswagen engine. At number 7 is the Hummel Bird. This tiny aircraft is one of the best examples of how creative home builders can turn simple materials into a surprisingly capable airplane. Designed by Maury Hummel, the Hummel Bird was built around a very clever idea. Use part of a Volkswagen engine to power a small, all-metal aircraft. More specifically, many Hummel Bird aircraft used a half VW engine, essentially a Volkswagen Beetle engine modified into a lightweight two-cylinder aircraft engine. That sounds unusual, but it made sense. Volkswagen engines were simple, common, affordable, and familiar to home builders. By cutting the concept down and adapting it for flight, builders could create a lightweight power plant that fit the needs of a tiny aircraft. The Hummel Bird is often described as weighing around 300 pounds, depending on build. It can use engines in the 30 to 45 horsepower range. And despite that modest power, it can cruise at over 100 miles per hour, or about 160 kilometers per hour, depending on configuration. That is what makes it impressive. This is not a giant engine dragging a tiny plane through the air. It is an efficient little aircraft making the most of every horsepower. The Hummel Bird is also known for its all-metal construction. For builders who prefer aluminum over wood and fabric, this gave the aircraft a more rugged, precise, and modern feeling. It is compact enough to fit into the world of garage-built aviation, but performance-oriented enough to feel like a true sport plane. Pilots often describe aircraft like this as responsive and lively. That is the polite way of saying, you need to pay attention. Small aircraft can react quickly. They can feel twitchy compared with larger airplanes. They do not always forgive sloppy flying, but that is also part of the attraction. The Hummel Bird is not trying to be a floating sofa. It is a miniature sport aircraft, a pocket rocket for builders who want performance, simplicity, and the satisfaction of flying something they helped create. That combination makes it one of the most respected tiny home-built aircraft ever made. Number 6. Tipsy Nipper, the tiny Belgian aerobatic plane with a car engine spirit. At number 6 is the Tipsy Nipper. This little Belgian aircraft shows that small does not have to mean boring. The Nipper first flew in the late 1950s and was designed as a small, affordable, fun aircraft that could still deliver real performance. It was created by Ernest Oscar Tips, a Belgian designer with a strong background in light aircraft. The goal was simple: build a compact single-seat airplane that ordinary pilots could enjoy, maintain, and even use for aerobatics. One of the most interesting parts of the Tipsy Nipper story is its connection to Volkswagen-style engines. Many small aircraft from this era used adapted automotive engines because they were cheaper and easier to maintain than purpose-built aircraft engines. For a tiny sport plane, that made a lot of sense. The Nipper had an empty weight of around 365 pounds, depending on configuration. It could reach speeds over 100 miles per hour, or around 162 kilometers per hour. And it was designed to handle aerobatic maneuvers, including loops and rolls, when properly built and operated. That is important. A small aircraft does not automatically become aerobatic. It needs structural strength. It needs responsive controls. It needs the right balance. And it needs a pilot who understands the limits. The Nipper became loved because it combined small size with real personality. It was not just a slow ultralight drifting over grass fields. It was a tiny sport airplane, sharp, fun, affordable, and capable enough to make pilots smile. Even after production problems and the loss of original manufacturing materials, the aircraft survived through dedicated builders and owners. That is a common theme in the world of tiny aircraft. The machines survive because people love them, not because they are profitable, not because they dominate the market, but because they create an experience that bigger aircraft cannot copy. The Tipsy Nipper is one of those aircraft. Small enough to feel personal, fast enough to feel exciting, and simple enough to remind pilots that fun does not always require size. Number 5. Colomban MC-15 Cri-Cri, the world's smallest twin-engine aircraft. At number 5 is the Colomban MC-15 Cri-Cri, and this one is almost unbelievable, because the Cri-Cri is widely known as one of the smallest twin-engine aircraft ever built. When most people hear twin-engine airplane, they imagine something large: a commuter aircraft, a business plane, maybe a military trainer. Not a tiny single-seat machine that looks like it could fit in the corner of a garage. But the Cri-Cri does exactly that. Designed by French engineer Michel Colomban in the 1970s, the Cri-Cri is a masterpiece of minimalist engineering. It is extremely small, extremely light, and yet surprisingly capable. The aircraft weighs roughly 170 pounds empty in some versions, depending on configuration. It has a wingspan of about 16 feet, or just under 5 meters. It uses two small engines mounted close to the nose, and despite its tiny size, it can reach speeds over 120 miles per hour, or about 190 kilometers per hour, depending on the version. The most interesting technical feature is the centerline thrust arrangement. Because the engines are mounted close together near the centerline, the aircraft remains more manageable if one engine fails than a conventional twin with engines mounted far apart on the wings. That is a clever solution. In a normal twin-engine aircraft, losing one engine can create strong yaw because the working engine pulls harder on one side. But in the Cri-Cri, the thrust line is much closer to the center, making asymmetric thrust less extreme. This is exactly the kind of smart engineering that makes the aircraft so respected. It is tiny, but not careless. It is simple, but not crude. And over time, the Cri-Cri has become more than a quirky home built. It has been used as a platform for experimentation, including electric versions and even tiny jet-powered modifications. That makes it one of the most flexible miniature aircraft ever built. The Cri-Cri proves that small does not mean limited. It can be light, fast, aerobatic, efficient, and technologically interesting at the same time. And for many aviation enthusiasts, it remains one of the greatest examples of what happens when an engineer asks, "How much airplane do you really need?" Number 4. Stits Sky Baby, the tiny record plane built from rivalry and obsession. At number 4 is the Stits Sky Baby. This is not just a small airplane. It is a story of ambition, record-breaking, and rivalry. Built in the early 1950s by Ray Stits in Riverside, California, the Sky Baby was created to claim the title of the world's smallest airplane. And when you look at it, you understand the obsession immediately. The aircraft is absurdly tiny. It had a length of roughly 10 feet, or about 3 meters. Its wingspan was only around 7 feet 2 inches, or about 2.18 meters, and yet it was powered by an engine producing around 112 horsepower. That is a huge amount of power for such a small aircraft. The Sky Baby used a biplane layout, but with an unusual negative stagger arrangement, meaning the top wing was positioned behind the lower wing. This helped balance the aircraft's design around the engine, pilot, and extremely short airframe. But make no mistake, this was not an easy plane to fly. A very small aircraft with a powerful engine and tiny wings creates serious handling challenges. There is less natural stability, less forgiving glide performance, less margin for error. That is why the Sky Baby needed a very skilled pilot. Robert H. Starr became the man brave enough to fly it, and the story between Stits and Starr later became part of the legend. The partnership eventually soured, and Starr would go on to build even smaller aircraft in an attempt to break records himself. That rivalry gave miniature aviation one of its strangest chapters. The Sky Baby reportedly reached speeds around 185 miles per hour, or nearly 300 kilometers per hour. Imagine that, a plane barely longer than a small car, flying at highway racing speeds through the sky. Today, the original Sky Baby is preserved at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. That tells you how important it became. It was not practical. It was not comfortable. It was not a beginner aircraft. But it was a monument to a question that has always pushed aviation forward. How small can an airplane be and still fly? The Sky Baby answered that question in one of the most dramatic ways possible. Number 3. Starr Bumble Bee II, the world record plane that almost killed its pilot. At number 3 is the Starr Bumble Bee II. If the Sky Baby was the aircraft that started a record-breaking rivalry, the Bumble Bee II was the machine that pushed it to the edge. Robert H. Starr had once flown the Sky Baby, but after his relationship with Ray Stitz turned bitter, Starr wanted to build something even smaller. Not just to fly, not just to prove a point, but to take the record. The result was the Bumblebee series. The first Bumblebee was already tiny, but the Bumblebee II went even further. It had a wingspan of only about 5 feet 6 inches, or roughly 1.68 meters. That is shorter than many adults are tall. It was an aircraft so small that Starr had to squeeze into the cockpit in an almost impossible position. His knees were close to his chest. The aircraft wrapped around him like a flying metal box, and yet it flew. The Bumblebee II became famous for setting a Guinness World Record as one of the world's smallest aircraft. But the victory came with serious danger. Small wings mean high wing loading. High wing loading means faster takeoff and landing speeds, less glideability, and very little forgiveness if something goes wrong. And something did go wrong. During a flight, the aircraft suffered an engine failure. With such tiny wings, the Bumblebee II had almost no ability to glide gently. It descended violently. The crash seriously injured Starr, though he survived. That incident turned the Bumblebee II into more than just a record aircraft. It became a warning. There is a line between brilliant miniaturization and dangerous compromise. The Bumblebee II crossed closer to that line than almost any aircraft in history. It proved that an airplane could be incredibly small, but it also proved that physics does not care about records. A wing still needs area. An aircraft still needs stability. A pilot still needs margin. The Bumblebee II is one of the most fascinating tiny planes ever built because it represents both the glory and the danger of record chasing. It was brave. It was extreme. It was almost ridiculous. And it nearly cost its creator everything. Number 2. Beechcraft Wee Bee, the plane you fly by lying on top of it. At number 2 is the Beechcraft Wee Bee. This is one of the strangest aircraft concepts ever built because the pilot does not sit inside it. The pilot lies on top of it. The Wee Bee was designed in the late 1940s by engineers from Convair who wanted to demonstrate just how small a human-carrying airplane could become. And the result looked like something between a miniature aircraft, a powered glider, and a flying surfboard. There was no normal cockpit. Instead, the pilot lay prone on top of the aircraft, almost like riding a motorcycle in the sky. The pilot's body became part of the aerodynamic shape. The aircraft was built with a lightweight metal structure. It weighed around 210 pounds, or about 95 kilograms. It had a wingspan of roughly 18 feet, or 5.5 meters. It used a small engine producing around 30 horsepower, and it could reach speeds up to about 82 miles per hour, or 132 kilometers per hour. By today's standards, that does not sound fast. But imagine lying face down on top of a tiny airplane with nothing like a traditional cockpit around you. At 82 miles per hour, that would feel extremely fast. The Wee Bee became a symbol of post-war aviation experimentation in California. After World War II, engineers had skills, materials, and imagination, and many of them wanted to explore what aircraft could become when rules were pushed. The Wee Bee was not designed for mass production. It was designed to make a point. How small can a powered aircraft be? How much can you remove before it stops being practical? Can the pilot become part of the structure? The original aircraft was later destroyed in a fire, but replicas and museum displays helped preserve its legacy. The Wee Bee earns the number 2 spot because it is more than a tiny aircraft. It is a visual shock. You do not just fly it, you climb onto it. And that makes it one of the most unforgettable miniature planes ever created. Number 1. Bede BD-5J Microjet, the world's smallest jet that became a movie star. And at number 1 is the Bede BD-5J Microjet. This is the tiny aircraft that feels almost too cool to be real. A miniature jet, a personal rocket-shaped aircraft. A plane so small it looks like a toy beside a normal business jet, but fast enough to leave people stunned. Designed by Jim Bede, the BD-5 family began as an attempt to create a small, affordable, high-performance home-built aircraft, but the jet-powered BD-5J became the legend. It used a tiny turbojet engine producing around 200 pounds of thrust, depending on the version. The aircraft weighed around 450 pounds empty. It had a wingspan of about 17 feet, and it could reach speeds over 300 miles per hour, or about 480 kilometers per hour. That is the reason the BD-5J became famous. It was not just small, it was fast, very fast. The aircraft's sleek bullet-shaped fuselage looked like a tiny fighter jet. The pilot sat in a cramped cockpit. The wings could be removed for storage, and the entire aircraft had the feeling of a personal microfighter. But flying it was not easy. The BD-5J had high wing loading, sensitive controls, and very little room for pilot error. It required real skill, real training, and serious respect. This was not a toy. It was a true high-performance jet aircraft, only miniaturized. The BD-5J became world famous when it appeared in the James Bond film Octopussy, where it performed one of the most memorable tiny aircraft scenes in cinema. That moment turned it from an aviation curiosity into a pop culture icon. But beyond the movie fame, the BD-5J represents something deeper. It is the ultimate expression of the miniature aircraft dream. Not just small enough to fit in a garage, not just light enough to shock people, but powered by a jet engine, fast enough to thrill pilots, and recognizable enough that even people who know nothing about aviation stop and stare. The BD-5J Microjet takes the number 1 spot because it combines everything that makes tiny aircraft fascinating: extreme size, extreme performance, extreme danger, extreme engineering, and a design so unforgettable that it still feels futuristic decades later. It is not the most practical aircraft ever built, but it may be the coolest tiny plane ever to fly, and in the world of miniature aviation, that is hard to beat. Tiny planes, giant dreams, and there they are, 10 of the smallest, strangest, and most incredible planes ever built. The Team Minimax brought aviation into the garage. The Ison Airbike turned flying into something that felt like riding a motorcycle. The Flying Flea started a do-it-yourself aviation movement. The Hummel Bird proved a tiny metal aircraft could be fast and fun. The Tipsy Nipper showed that small planes could still dance through the sky. The Cri-Cri became the world's smallest twin-engine aircraft. The Sky Baby turned record-breaking into an obsession. The Bumble Bee II proved how dangerous that obsession could become. The Wee Bee made the pilot lie on top of the aircraft, and the BD-5J Microjet became the tiny jet that stole the show. These aircraft are not normal. Some are beautiful, some are strange, some are dangerous, and some look like they should not be able to fly at all. But they all prove one thing: aviation has never only belonged to giant airliners, military jets, and expensive business aircraft. It also belongs to builders in garages, engineers with wild ideas, pilots willing to take risks, and dreamers who look at a tiny frame, a small engine, and a pair of wings, and see the sky. So, which one of these tiny aircraft would you be brave enough to fly? The BD-5J Microjet? The Cri-Cri? The Airbike? Or the impossible-looking Wee Bee? Tell us in the comments below. and subscribe to Unbox the World for more incredible aircraft, futuristic machines, extreme engineering, and the strange vehicles that prove human imagination has no limits. This is Unbox the World. We do not just show you the machine, we open it. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.